Okay, we're going to talk about transformations of trig graphs. You've got this one note. The features of a trig graph, the main features are that we have an amplitude, and when we're dealing with a parent function, like this graph here, basically you're dealing with a period, or an amplitude, sorry, of 1. An amplitude is the wave, and it's the height of the wave, the strength of the wave. In a parent function of a sine or cosine graph, the amplitude is 1. The period, how far the graph goes before it starts to repeat itself, is 360. And you have a line of symmetry, and basically a line of symmetry is a thing that basically makes this graph go symmetrical across. So the x-axis here is the line of symmetry in a parent function. So you've got a wave that's symmetrical above and below the x-axis. So that's my line of symmetry. The domain, all the x values, all real numbers. And the range in this particular graph will range, the y values can only be from -1 to 1. So that's the range. So these are the basic features of the parent function. The amplitude is the size of the wave of the graph. It's the max and min points. We have a line of symmetry, and if you get stuck finding the max and min and can't grab those off the graph, you can calculate them by going max minus min divided by 2. And the amplitude, if you take a look at the graph, the amplitude is determined, how big it is determined by the number in front of the sine or cosine. So this k here, this is my amplitude. This is the number that determines my sine and cosine. So if I put k at 2, you will notice that the amplitude is now a max and a min at +2 and -2, and my line of symmetry is still my x-axis. And so that's what k does, it changes the amplitude of the graph. And if it's negative, it flips the graph. So that's amplitude. The other feature of the graph is period. And again, that is where the graph basically completes itself and begins to repeat. So if we take a look here, the period of the graph is how far it goes to complete one cycle. So in a normal parent graph, it's always 360 for both sine and cosine. And the value that basically changes the period is the number that's in front of the x being multiplied by the x, and often you will see that in brackets. And then if we change b, make it 5, make it 4, make it 3, or make it smaller than 1. So there's 1, completes itself at 360. And then if we just click off those points, if we do things, we'll just make that one go away. If we do things to this graph, we can see how it compresses and stretches the graph. So b changes the period. And let's just say the period, or b is not the period, but b is 2, you will see that this graph starts at 0, 0, and then repeats itself at 180 and 0. So you can actually calculate what b is. If you know what the period is of this graph, you can take 360, which is the normal period, and divide it by the 2 to get your new period. And so we have this relationship between b and the original period of a graph. The other thing is that you have a vertical slide. So just like all the other graphs, you can move the graph up and down. And the thing is with up and down is that your line of symmetry is also going to move. So if you move your c, say c is 3, you've moved the graph up 3. Your line of symmetry is at 3. So you can often determine what c is in the equation, what c is, by simply finding your line of symmetry. And if you find your line of symmetry, you can then find your max and min points and find your amplitude that way. So finding the line of symmetry helps you find c and it also will help you get your max and min points for your amplitude. So we have vertical slide that moves the graph up and down. And again, if you don't know what your actual C is, if your line of symmetry, to find C, let's just make C 2. If you know what your max and min points are, in this case it's up 3 and the minimum is 1, if you add those and divide by 2, 3 plus 1 is 4, divided by 2 is 2, that tells you what your amplitude, what your C is going to be. So when you go max plus min divided by 2, you get C. When you go max minus min divided by 2, you get your amplitude. And so now we've got to just use graphs like this one to practice finding values of A, B, and C. And so you can use this for some practice.